And, what a beautiful day. And Banks, what are you smoking?
Smoking some greens.
On a conservative talk show.
Hey, it's not that kind of greens. It's just green tea. Brought to you by TSP, who's totally not a sponsor.
You and your wacky intros. I should probably silence that before we really get into the nitty gritty.
And then cut the intro right there.
Oops. And welcome, one and all, on YouTube and in podcast land. You are listening to the Tangent Kings. Roll it. Welcome, one and all, back to the Tangent Kings podcast. I am, of course, G. Michael Francis, and I'm here with my partner in crime, my green smoking companion, Mr. Shejack. Benks. How you doing today, sir?
I'm well. I know I'm wearing a Wario cap, but for all the greens I'm smoking, I might as well be Luigi. Womp, womp, womp. I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good.
Yeah, you said like you're doing it. Oh, dear Lord. Now we're both getting unhinged.
Oh, yeah. And I'm the only one smoking here. This is my second pipe.
And for those of you who are just joining us in the federal government, he's smoking green tea leaves.
Yep.
This has nothing to do with hemp or marijuana or whatever slang term you have for it.
It only looks like hemp. It's not actual hemp.
Yes, we've established that.
Hey, Mike, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
On the brief subject of hemp. Minutes later. Do you think that they're going to legalize it at a federal level in the next 4 years or not?
Well, only because it's probably the only thing keeping Joe Biden alive.
That's hilarious.
Did I seriously just make that joke? Yes, I did.
Are you sorry? If I said it, I wouldn't be.
I might regret it later. But it is not this day that I shall regret
it. But it is not this day.
Anyway, before we go completely off the rails, let's just go over what we're going to talk about.
Yes. What is on the agenda tonight?
Well, on the agenda, we realized we made a few oopsies in the last episode, so we're going to issue some corrections and even an apology. And then we're going to get straight into a new and scarier bill, H.R. 127, the new gun control bill that's currently on the floor of the House. And if we got time, we're going to react to AOC and her January 6th experiences. And of course, you have a book quote, Mr. Banks. I trust you do.
Oh, I do.
And then we'll call it a night. So that sounds fair?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then after that very, very, very brief intro, let's get right into it. So a few corrections in regards to last week's episode. Go ahead, Mr. Banks. You're pretty much the voice behind this one.
Sure. So last week we were talking about the stonks, and I don't know if I made it clear enough in the episode that I don't fully understand stonks, like at all. And the information I was giving was not properly informed. And moving forward, I'm going to attempt to talk about subjects that I do understand in more detail or make it more clear. This may not be accurate. This is how I understand it. I didn't adequately describe what a short was. And I didn't adequately describe what a squeeze was either. So I wanted to mention that. I'm just barely kind of following whatever comes up in the news and kind of reading about it when I can. Moving forward, I will be more informed on that. And that's what I had for that one. and just a general request from the audience that we be more informed on the topics we present when we're trying to be informative. Otherwise, it's okay to be entertaining for a show, which I'm all for.
And I am going to sort of issue an apology. Uh, I think it was last week's episode where I said that libertarians were just liberals pretending to be conservatives. I realized that was a little too harsh.
Mm-hmm.
So I take that back and I apologize. That was unnecessarily harsh on my part.
Yeah, which I know I kind of got the intent of what you were trying to get across with it. You know, in a public platform, there's a tendency to misspeak, especially us being an off the cuff kind of show. What did you mean by that remark, Mike, anyways?
For the most part, in general, and this is just in general, there are exceptions to this rule. But from what I've observed, libertarians tend to be, it's sort of a conservatives defending a very loose tradition.
Mm-hmm.
I guess something along that line. And the way I presented it, like I said, came out a little too harsh.
You could also see it to some degree as a compliment. And what I mean by that is maybe another way of looking at what you had said was you've got classical liberals who are, classical liberals, right, where maximum individual liberty, maximum individual freedom, just as in a libertarian bundle, right, with a different name to it, or with a conservative spin on it, whatever you want to call it. But what we'd also said kind of before the show was that libertarianism isn't very strict. It's generally unified by smaller government, but you ask a bunch of libertarians what people think, and every libertarian has a different stance on something. Some things, yes, we should legalize marijuana. Some feel that we don't.
I will also clarify that mostly the variety of libertarianism that I'm usually exposed to are the kind of people who say, for example, like there's really nothing wrong with pornography because this is just a personal thing, or there's nothing wrong with recreational marijuana use, stuff along that line.
Right.
So that's my main exposure to libertarianism. I understand that there are different variations of it, but like I said, I take back my comments from last week. No.
Right. Well, you're just you're clarifying them as well, which I think kind of helps, because I think you and I were kind of used to hear, like, we kind of reinforce a similar perspective. We have differences, but we reinforce a similar perspective. And so when we say something to maybe people that aren't from our kind of our little bubble, it can maybe come across as a little bit harsher than we sometimes intend, or comes across differently because we have a mutual understanding as two co-hosts. Versus other people might come from a different understanding. So as we move forward, and I think that we start to have more voices, not only around the show, but when we get to a point where we're like ready to have some guests on the show, that's going to be really, really interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. And I've already got a few ideas lined up, and I'll tell you about my few ideas after we close out.
Oh, fantastic.
But anyway, so now that we got our general corrections out of the way, and I will say this, we should probably go into more detail about our corrections with the whole GameStop thing. I'll leave that as your project, Mr. Benks, because you actually have a better grip on it than I do.
Yeah, and I'll probably, Spike will be watching this, my bro. He'll be watching the show, and I might just ask him point blank, just tell me exactly everything that I misspoke on and help me understand it better. One really cool thing about doing Tangent Kings, Mike, is that when we're wrong, I mean, it's hard to kind of hear that, but when you're wrong, you've got listeners say, hey, actually, this wasn't accurate. I'm explaining to you, this is actually how it works. I'm like, oh, okay. So now I learned something. So I appreciate that a lot. Mm-hmm. We can be the figureheads of kind of like, let's say a statement and people like, well, this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think. And it provokes actual discussion and engaging of different ideas and help us all kind of figure out, well, what does it mean to mean all this stuff? And I like that about the show.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, so there's that, and yeah, we're the tangent kings, not the transition kings. So we're just gonna hop right into HR 127.
Can that be our catchphrase?
Yeah. Put that on a shirt and wear it.
If shirt ideas is not on the bingo sheet next week, it should be.
Yep.
Have you seen? By the way, Mike, this is related. Have you seen Star Trek?
Duh.
Of course you have. Do you know that one doctor guy from Voyager where he says, "I'm a hologram. I'm a doctor, not a."
Yeah. Ricardo.
No, Ricardo Montalban. That was
No. I wasn't. I was trying to say the actor's name. Richard Picardo.
Yeah, he's like, he would say like, "I'm a doctor, not a laborist," or "I'm a doctor, not a lesbian," or something. He would say stuff like that.
What?
He'd say stuff like that. So,
okay, I'm pretty sure he never said I'm a doctor, not a lesbian. He's a male persona. That's kind of impossible.
Well, on Star Trek, I have an open mind, so I'm smoking green tea. So
yeah, I just and he was also in Star Trek: First Contact.
He was.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a doctor, not a doorstop. He's probably one of my favorite actors on that show.
We're the Tangent Kings, not the Transition Kings.
Yeah, I'm a tangent king, not a transition king. Anyway, House Resolution 127. I looked it over throughout the week, and I watched a few commentaries on it. I thought House Resolution 1 was scary. And, to sort of put it in my own way of not hyperbole, comparative language. If HR1 is Freddy Fazbear, HR127 is freaking Springtrap. I mean, for me,
comparison.
What?
Good comparison.
Yeah, especially you got to explain. I played Five Nights at Freddy's like briefly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Freddy Fazbear was scary but tolerable compared to Springtrap.
Right. I
hate that guy. Funny story, funny anecdote. Mm-hmm. Before we move on, this was back when I was in the Marines, and I was what they call an 0933, which was a secondary MOS, but that's a combat marksmanship coach.
6943?
No, 0933. 0933. Oh boy.
He gets it now.
What am I going to do with this kid? Anyway, so we had all of our shooters. Draw their weapons from the armory at like 4 a.m. We're just sitting around waiting for the bus. So I decided to play Five Nights at Freddy's 3 on my phone. And I'm just sitting there, just kind of dinking away. Now, half these guys are, dozing off, if not already asleep. And I'm just taking off. So I had the sound off. And I got the Springtrap jump scare. I still yelled. And with that, about half the group went into combat stance. It was hilarious in its own right.
Contact Williams! It's like, no!
Yeah, contact my phone! Jeez.
They say, contact the service provider! 1-800-GEICO!
Quack. Anyway, but yeah, let me show you what I'm talking about with this new bill. Because holy crap. And here it is. So this is the beginning of it, the short title. I keep forgetting this short title because half the time I read a short title and it just goes in one ear, out the other. But yeah, it can be cited as the Sabika Chic Firearm Licensing Act and Registration Act. Benign so far. Then you get down to the licensing of firearm and ammunition possession, registration of firearms. And it's already getting scary. It says here, if I can get it lined up properly. In general, the Attorney General, through the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, who's bringing the chips, shall establish a system for licensing possession of firearms and ammunition in the United States and for the registration with the Bureau in each. You get the gist. Here's the fun part. Under the firearm registration system, the owner of a firearm shall transmit to the Bureau, that is the ATF, the make, model, and serial number of the firearm, which, funny enough, the first time I read that, I was like, wait, are we talking about firearms or cars? Yeah. The identity of the owner of the firearm, the date the firearm was acquired by the owner, and where the firearm is or will be stored. Getting a little worrisome because now they know not only what weapon I have, but exactly where I'm going to keep it.
Mike, help me understand. Why is that scary?
Well, when they suppose I make one little comment on Facebook, and to someone with common sense would be somewhat innocuous, but somebody decides to do this red flag.
Okay.
In comes the ATF, knowing where I am. They can see me where I am at, and they know where my firearm is at. Storm the house, prevent me from accessing my firearm, and by the way, this would probably be a no-knock warrant. So they're just busting in. I think it's a home invasion. I can't access my firearm. The next thing you know, I'm being thrown to the ground, being beaten to 7 different colors. But that's the benign part compared to the next part.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is that if the government is allowed, this bill enables the government to have the power to not only know where your firearm is, but also gives the government discretion on if they know where it is, right? Then they know where the firearm is, they can track it, and then they'll know where it is. It basically, they can use that information against you.
Pretty much.
At their discretion.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, although poorly and in sort of a ding-dong pinball fashion. But yeah, then there's the notice. Yeah, oh, and by the way, you also have to give them notice, if you loan it to somebody. So, and that's going to be a big problem later. And of course, that's a deadline. Now, this all goes to a database. Now, keep in mind, this database contains your identity, your location, the firearm storage location, and all that good stuff. The Attorney General shall make the contents of the database accessible to all members of the public. So in other words, a brief internet search, Al Capone, just to use a name off the top of my head, knows exactly where my firearm is, anywhere in my house. And you know how people love to make Facebook posts about going out to eat. Hey, out to eat with my adorable husband or a gorgeous wife, something to that nature. Well, while I'm out, one of their guys comes in. Plants a little, or gets into the safe somehow. If this person can afford a safe. Next thing you know, they got the firearm. And yeah, that I'll show you later. That gets very problematic for the owner, because when that firearm is used in a crime, not only is the user liable to criminal prosecution, but the owner from whom it was stolen. And
if you imagine from a political perspective, what if that there is a defined victim class, right? From a legal standpoint of X
I did not think about that.
What if X persons of a particular religious minority, right? Say the perpetrator is a protected class and the owner is of a persecutor class, right? You don't talk about individuals in this kind of system in a Marxist worldview. You talk about there's always the aggressor and there's always the victim. in terms of class, group, identity, whatever it is. Always the aggressor, always the victim, right? The sandwich eaters and the non-sandwich eaters, right?
About time you brought the sandwich back into this.
I had to. And what if the government has said it doesn't matter the morality of the situation because morals don't matter. You can't define those unless we define them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're part of the whatever group. We don't even have to do an investigation. You are a white, straight male, right?
And
Maybe even
just to
Protestant.
make it that much worse, we'll make him a traditionalist Catholic.
Sure, let's do that. You're a WASP, right? You're a WASP or a WASC instead of P. Instead of a Protestant, you are a Anglo-Saxon Catholic, right? Or whatever the new religious oppressor group is. Let's say in even a different situation, you're a Jew, you're a Jewish person, right? And you're a disgusting rat, right? Which I don't agree with, but I'm
with
talking
a
about
space laser
here.
that starts forest fires.
Right. You're a Jew and you're attacking a sovereign German citizen. Even though the German citizen was in wrong, doesn't matter. Throw the burden is on the oppressor class, so it doesn't even matter. Another context, say you have an African American citizen, right, who may have stolen the firearm, but it belongs to a say an Hispanic person, and maybe Hispanics are the new oppressor class, right? Well, it doesn't matter what the African American does. The Hispanic person is therefore at fault. The second point is if you have a database that's publicly accessed, not only does this enable for people to get doxxed like that, if you're a burglar, why wouldn't you just, in whatever city you're in, say you live in a diner, like a small town in Kentucky, and you're a burglar, why can you access the National Firearms Registration Database and find out which of those people in your neighborhood have firearms and which one don't? Oh, that's
another good point. Yeah.
Why can't criminals use this?
Yeah, it's so obvious, but I didn't even think of it.
What's to stop Antifa from knocking at your door once they realize, oh, he voted for Trump?
Mm-hmm.
He voted for, or even maybe a different example. Maybe there's a new political candidate that runs that the party in power doesn't like. Oh, well, send the radical groups there because they can look you up. Why can't we show up on their doorstep? And then obviously the politicians went, oh, we publicly condemn these attacks and these string of burglaries, but they're useful idiots. They're carrying out the will of the party.
And Stalin publicly condemned the rape of Berlin.
Yeah, but it's still useful idiots. They're carrying out the will of the party, or they are incongruent enough with it where if the politicians at the top level, if they're associated with it, oh, I'm not associated at all, but they're still accomplishing the ends.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this completely tramples on states' rights of how they want to run their own firearm laws. So at this point,
not to mention the Second Amendment.
Yeah. If the federal government can issue and non-issue, it basically forcing strict gun control laws on the whole country. If the state can issue, the federal government can issue and non-issue firearm permits at their discretion, just like we can decide who's in power at our discretion, then your constitutional rights don't matter. If they can waive it on a whim, I mean, the Fourth Amendment's already gone. The First Amendment's effectively neutered, right? If you can't have access to a public platform and say what you want, right? Free speech protects everybody, right? It's not an unreasonable position. It protects everybody. To say offensive things, it's to protect minority groups, to say things that don't agree with the majority. Same thing here. If you can't defend yourself from government tyranny, why can't they just take this? It's like Patriot Act 2.0. Why can't they expand it into something more? If the federal government can issue at whim, then it's like, okay, I need to apply with the state and the government.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. You still have to go through your state's licensing. But, it gets better.
Does it now?
In order to receive a general license, now keep in mind, there are 3 licenses that are mentioned in this bill. You got the general license, antique firearms license, and military style firearms license. So the general license is just purchase like a hunting rifle, for example. The antique one, the antique firearms, That's for displaying, say, a chassepo on your wall. And for those of you who don't know, a chassepo, the chassepo I'm talking about is a French military rifle from the late 19th century, which was an early example breech loading firearm. It's what's called a needle rifle.
So is the rifle right before bolt action rifles in the Great War?
Well, yeah, it was a bolt action rifle technically, but it wasn't a smokeless cartridge. Or
Okay.
it was a black powder rifle.
Okay.
But yeah, but basically how it works is, you pull the trigger, the system shoots a needle into basically a paper cartridge, and at the base of the bullet is the primer. Hits the primer, detonates it, and boom, out it goes.
So instead of it being a breech loading musket where you load it down like that, right?
Well, that's a muzzle loader.
Right, you load it from the muzzle. This one you shoot a needle into it. Interesting.
No, well, yeah, you still load it from the breech, so it's still like a bolt action.
So you load it, put it in there, and then that's the load it, crank the bolt down, and then the needle strikes it. Okay.
Basically. Yeah. But yeah, here's what you have to go through to get a general license. Now, this is to just own like a hunting rifle or something along that line. First, you have to be 21 years of age. And then you have to undergo a criminal background check, a psych eval, and a training course certified by the Attorney General, in the use, safety, and storage of the firearms. That includes at least 24 hours of training. And I can't remember where I saw it in this one, but for the first 3 years, or for the first 5 years, rather, these two are annual requirements. Or at least the psych eval is no, they're both. For the first 3 years or 5 years, these are both required annually.
Mm-hmm. So effectively, you have to do. Is the third? Do you know if the third one's required annually?
Oh yeah, the insurance policy. I nearly forgot about that, and we'll get to it.
Oh no, I meant the 24 hours of training. So do you have to go the 24 hours training each time per year just to keep the gun?
Yep.
So basically, effectively, what they're doing is that they're saying if you don't continually meet these 3 requirements, or the government just decides, oh, you're psychologically unfit because maybe you are a Christian, right? Or, oh, you believe in QAnon, or whatever boogeyman I can make up, right?
Or if you express a desire to own a firearm, which some medical journal listed that as a sign of a psychological disorder.
Right. Or you say, oh, you're anti-vaxxer, or you are a climate denier, right? Or you're a breeder, or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. If the government decides that's immediate fail on a psychological evaluation. Maybe it wasn't at first, but later on it is. Effectively, and you have to do these enormous hurdles just to keep the firearm. Otherwise, the government could basically they're saying, we're going to make it so difficult for you to keep and maintain a firearm, and that we can just take it back at our discretion because we're somehow the moral arbiters of truth and justice.
And there's another point, which is fairly obvious, but I only just thought of it now. Mm-hmm. Nowhere in this bill does it mention funding for any of these, which means it's probably going to be individually funded. In other words, there's a fee, there's a fee, there's a fee, there's a fee on the part of the individual. So we're already talking probably $200 to $300 just to get the license.
Yeah.
And that just to get one license.
Yeah. And let's assume it gets even more expensive to own a firearm. So not only do you have to buy the ammo, which is, if it continues to stay expensive, why wouldn't it? The more you regulate it, generally speaking, the more the government regulates things, the more expensive it becomes, because you have to jump through the loopholes, and that costs a lot of money. So drop $1,500 on just a rifle, right? And it's $100 per box of ammo, and it's not a lot of ammo. It's becoming so expensive, right, that the average person isn't going to be able to own a firearm.
Which I will circle back to in a little bit. And I will actually circle back to it, not unlike Jen Psaki.
Yeah. Well, the point is, I want to make this brief with Mike, is it has to be a training course certified the Attorney General. So it has to be I wouldn't surprise me if it's a very highly you know how education system is highly regulated, and it's like you have to jump through all these little check boxes for school curriculum. Why wouldn't the government have enormous requirements for training courses that don't effectively teach people what they need to know? It's just there for the bureaucracy of it. You have to sit through a boring class of it. Basically, it's giving the Attorney General power to if it's not certified for the Attorney General, it doesn't matter, because it's like, oh, the AG didn't certify it, so therefore the class doesn't matter.
And we should also mention, who the Attorney General pick is by Biden.
Who is it?
I remember his first name. I keep forgetting his last name.
It was Merrick Garland, wasn't it?
Thank you, Merrick Garland. I always blank on his last name.
Yeah.
Big anti-gunner.
If he's the Attorney General, then he basically could decide that nobody gets own a firearm in the U.S. It turns the Attorney General into a firearm despot.
Pretty much. But yeah, here's the second license, and pretty much the same thing. And then it goes to military weapons style. Or military style weapons license. Wow. Yeah, pretty much same thing again. With the psychological evaluation particularly being highlighted. Now, This is off the top of my head, off the cuff. What if I want to display an FG42, which would probably fall under all three of these categories?
Yeah, FG42s.
I would have to have a license, all three licenses, just to have the one gun.
Yeah. The FG42, for those of you who don't know, the FG42 was not a prototype. It was an issued German paratrooper, fully automatic, a German paratrooper rifle for World War II. They're exceedingly rare these days. So if you wanted to display something like that, because here's the thing, here's 2 points I wanted to point out. It says military style weapons, right? And that's been a talking point of the left for a very long time.
They called it assault weapons back then.
They called it that, and that got criticized, so they had to change it to military style. And it's like, military style can mean anything. It's not specific what it means, right? If it looks
they do list have a list of what qualifies as a military style weapon. I just forgot where it is. Where it is in the bill.
We'll get to that. Second point I wanted to, then we'll get to that. But second, because it sounds like rhetoric, maybe they're specific about it, but specifically it says under that psychological evaluation, the Attorney General sets the standards, and the psychologist has to be approved by the Attorney General. So basically, again, the Attorney General basically decides what a psychologically sane person is, gets to own a firearm. And if you think no sane person would own a gun, right? Because it's a bunch of stupid rednecks from flyover states, and who the F gives a crap about what they think, right? Oh, you just want your guns. Well, guess what? The new morality's here, and you don't get a say in the matter. Nobody gets a gun. He has the power at his discretion to say it. It's almost like appointing the Attorney General to be his own branch of civil liberties, is what he's becoming at what this bill does.
I mean, if you couldn't already do that with that already, because you're already spending like $200 to $300 with each license minimum. So we're already talking between $600 to $900,
right,
on the licensing alone.
And
then, of course, we got the denial of license. Now, if the individual is prohibited by federal law, which is given, but then, if the individual has been hospitalized with a mental illness or disturbance or diagnosis, somewhat vague, not vague, but broad terminology here. Or addiction to a controlled substance or alcohol. So there are doctors out there who think like 5 to 6 beers a week is addiction to alcohol.
Right. The concern too is like literally if there's this this is so broad, right? When you say alcohol, so if you literally had a sip of a beer, then you can be denied. Like if you literally just drink, like if you're not an alcoholic, but you just have sit down with the guys at the pub once a week,
or have a sip of communion wine every week.
Right. Then that gives them legal justification to not, because denial. That's it. Or conduct that endangers self or others. So here's one thing I want to point out with that. Conduct that engages self or others, right? What the standard that's being said on Twitter right now is any speech that could not does cause harm, it could conceivably cause harm. So basically, if I can imagine it causes harm, so if it can cause harm, right? That's your speech saying that the election was fraud. The election was fraudulent.
Or just out of the blue, I disagree with Islam because XYZ. Oh,
right. That could cause harm, that perspective, right? Or, you're casting doubts on Greta Thunberg's divine authority, right? Or climate change.
Divine authority in a God we don't even believe in.
Correct, yes. She has divine authority as long as we say so, but you talk about objective morality or any kind of belief in God, and sorry, there's nothing there. But I mean that facetiously, of course. I'm just, just being a dick. But my point is that if they say stuff like that, you don't get a gun. That's all you have to say. It's if it can cause harm, if your speech cause harm in a way that the party decides it, right? Then they say, it endangers other people, so done. Oh, you're a Trump supporter. You believe that Trump should be president. That's endangering the public, so done. It makes it completely arbitrary.
And moving on, suspension of license and revocation of license. I mean, you got the general, a license issued under the subsection to an individual who is under indictment is punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year is hereby expended. So if you're indicted, not even charged or not even formally convicted of a crime, there goes your license.
Yep.
And and whether you're found innocent or guilty, it's gone. But now here's another interesting point. Revocation of license. Where did I see it? Because there was also that bit about insurance. Because you have to buy federal mandated insurance out. No, the federal government forcing its citizens to buy something. That sounds oddly familiar.
Yep. It's Obamacare again. It's
pretty much.
It's the same idea of like saying you have to participate in this system, right? I mean, isn't that, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the whole reason why people wanted to, or a lot of Catholics had problems with Planned Parenthood, was that it was using everybody's tax money, right, to force, like basically say, I'm gonna force you to pay for something you don't think is morally right. You have a moral conviction against abortion.
Well, the Catholic Church doesn't really like Planned Parenthood because it procures abortions.
Correct. Yeah, and the Catholic Church considers that it considers that morally evil. In fact, it considers it morally reprehensible. That's their perspective, right? And to tax people and say you must participate in it, or we don't care what your morals are, we will crush your morals. We'll put them under heel. You must comply because we know better than you. Whenever no matter what your religion is, if the state's telling people that, bad things follow. It says, we don't care what you believe. We're the truth. We are God and you are not. That's the attitude, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to find that.
Again, with this, is like, it keeps saying the attorney general is it's up to his discretion, right?
Right. And
who's the attorney general appointed to? By the president. So whoever's president gets to decide how the country runs, how the Constitution is, whether it's in place or not.
Exactly.
And the Republicans don't have power right now, and they're not going to fight back on this. They're too scared.
I'm just going to stop the share real quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're pretty much nailed right on the head. Whoever holds the power gets to decide whether or not you have a gun.
Yeah. And that's dangerous because if it's up to the reason why firearms are so important is because they're there to defend against tyranny, government tyranny. That's the point. The biggest threat isn't necessarily a burglar, which it might be, but the biggest threat is your government. who does not have your best interest in mind, especially if they're trying to tyrannize you. If they're trying to tyrannize and terrorize you, the first thing they have to do is declaw you so you can't fight back.
Exactly. And I finally found the insurance bit.
$800.
Oh, that's not the best part.
It's $800 for firearm insurance. That's how much it
annually.
costs. Annually? That's how much a gun costs.
Exactly. And this isn't like going to an insurance company. This is going direct to the office of the Attorney General. Right here.
So
for those of you who could see my cursor.
Yeah. So they're basically making it so that it's next to impossible. I don't think they can outright just ban firearms, but they're basically making it's like, where we still love the Constitution. It's like, no, you don't.
No, you don't. Yeah. This $800 that's supposed it's going to insurance, to the Attorney General, and in normal society, that's what we call a kickback.
Yeah, it's on the everyday person, it's an enormous tax. It's a kickback. It's like if this goes right into the pocket of the Attorney General, it's like this is like going to be the most you get paid. You're incentivizing the Attorney General. If that's accurate, if I'm reading this correctly, you're paying the Attorney General bonuses effectively to violate the Constitution,
so that you might be protected from liability whenever your firearm has to be discharged,
which you won't be, because the Attorney General can just deem you psychologically unfit for not supporting his party.
Exactly.
I don't agree with the National Socialist German Workers' Party. I don't agree with the Nazis. You're psychologically unfit because the Nazis are good people, right? That should be taken out. That'll be taken out of context.
Yeah, that's going to get cut and clipped.
Oh,
correct.
And if I say I don't support white supremacists, I don't support white nationalists, I don't support the Nazis. Well, you see that here in the government, that means you're psychologically unfit, because that's all we are in government. It's like, oh, great, thanks. I can't fight back. I can't resist you.
And, just for your entertainment pleasure, I'm not going to go through the list myself, so just sort of pause if you want to read the whole thing. But here's the definition of what is a military firearm. But it also includes a semi-automatic rifle that has the ability to accept a detachable magazine and has at least two of the following: a folding or telescoping stock, pistol grip that protrudes, a bayonet mount, a flash suppressor or a threaded barrel, and a grenade launcher.
So effectively, that the weapon doesn't necessarily even need to have this. It's that it just can accept it.
Yeah, exactly.
So effectively, this basically precludes you from even having any effective of defense. Mm-hmm. And it's a this is preventing you from having any weapon that was built prior or after World War II, effectively World War II, or even some things before World War II. It's like most of these weapons, wouldn't
that be interesting if you came faced off a force of, I'm just gonna, not even the federal government, I'm just gonna say if the Chinese invade and you face them off with a Fedorov automat.
Yeah.
Which, for those of you who don't know, it was an automatic rifle designed in World War I.
Yeah. And it was a Russian automatic rifle. But it's like this is the kind of stuff where it's like it says a semi-automatic shotgun, so if the magazine has more than 5 rounds in it, has a folding stock on it, or the gun can hold 5 rounds in it, and it can accept a detachable magazine. Oh, that means it's therefore military. So basically what it's saying is that you can't have they don't want you to be what effectively is the government doesn't want you to be sufficiently armed if they want to tyrannize you. The only thing you could have is ineffective firearms like a revolver. Like, you're not going to use revolver if it's the the American equivalent of the KGB knocking at your door at 3 a.m., kicking it open because you are psychologically unfit.
And that's also another good point, because, you know, this is also coming from the same side who's saying defund the police.
Yeah.
I mean,
and then they flip
just
right
off the top
back
of my
on.
head.
Yep.
Well, no, just off the top of
fast.
my head, you know, just get rid of the police, because that's the old order, and replace it with something in my head I call the PJC, the People's Justice Corps.
Yeah.
Which there's no mention of that anywhere. I know. I just came up with it off the top of my head.
I like that. We should put that in a book.
Oh, I'm way ahead of you on that one.
I bet you are.
Anyway, so moving on.
So what's a clerical amendment? Okay, never mind. I thought that was so prohibitions. It's so, and then it's saying that what's the penalties for establishment? The Attorney General can describe how hard they want to throw the book at you.
Yeah, pretty much. And we'll get in, here's the good part: the penalties.
So violates any of the sections shall be fined
no less than 75 grand.
So basically what they'll do is say, if you don't comply, right? If you don't comply, we'll bankrupt you and we'll throw you in prison for 15 to 25 years. This is going to criminalize more than half the U.S. population. If half the U.S. population decides we don't want to do this, the government's going to start over the next however many years. Oh my God, this is horrific. When you get to the point where we're saying, okay, if you don't comply, we will take, like, plus if you take a look at, for example, if you have a corrupt state government, they have an ability, as demonstrated by the Atlas Gym in New Jersey, for example, getting 6 figures subtracted from their bank account, which was intended for legal fees, subtracted from them by the state government because they said, oh, you didn't comply and you've got outstanding fines, so we can just take that out. What if you have investments in your bank account? The government can just come in and take that. They can just take all your money, and they can throw you in prison for 15 years or not more than 25 years, or both. So they can do both.
And here's a few of the best parts with this part. You know, if you loan your gun to somebody and they use it in a crime, or if they just have an ND, a negligent discharge, fine no less than 100 grand, in prison not less than 25 years. So yeah, you don't even commit the crime. You go to prison because the person you loaned it to, who you loaned it to, who probably lied to you, they use it in a crime, you go to jail.
Yeah.
And then whoever knowingly violates 922cc, that's the insurance. If you don't buy the Attorney General's kickback, you're fined no less than 50 grand and in prison no less than 10 years. So you can see the price tag on this thing. It's pretty much, you know, why even bother owning a gun, especially if you're the only people who can afford to have a gun if this passes and becomes law are going to be
the ultra rich.
Yeah, pretty much like Hollywood elites.
Yep, they can own guns.
That's about all I can think of.
Yeah, security management groups. Well, it's like, and then why can't the Attorney General be selective about who he approves and who he doesn't?
Yeah, that too.
Why can't you bribe him? You know.
So yeah, overall,
God, this is just flat out evil. This is really disturbingly evil because of the implications here.
Yeah, and I mean, putting like issues of government tyranny aside, just normal everyday self-defense. You're denying the have-nots their birthright of self-defense. And I'm going to go into the Catechism of the Catholic Church here. And the Catholic Church does defend the right of the ordinary man to self-defense. Well, I shouldn't say the ordinary. It defends the right of self-defense. So yeah, love towards oneself remains a fundamental principle of morality. Therefore, it is legitimate to insist on respect for one's own right to life. So someone who defends his life is not guilty of murder, even if he is forced to deal his aggressor a lethal blow. What?
Wow.
So yeah, even the Catholic Church, and yeah, that's Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2264.
Can I just say how I never knew that. I never knew that. I was raised with the expectation that you don't matter, right? You as an individual don't matter, but other people do. To say that you love yourself and you love your neighbor, which is what Christ taught.
Yeah, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes, you matter and your neighbor matters. And then to say that who defends his own life is not guilty of murder because you're not trying to kill the other in self-defense. So what it says is if a man in self-defense uses more necessary, it's basically saying that if you moderate your defense just enough to overcome the attacker or save yourself, that's fine. But to use more than that is immoral, which that's like common. That of course that's like plainly true. It's like, yeah, you use restraint.
But but then you deprive the average man the means to defend himself and his family from any form of unjust attack. Mm-hmm. You yourself are committing a grave injustice. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden, you claim to be a Catholic. You ought to know better. Buy a shotgun, and shoot it in the air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have absolutely no way to defend yourself whatsoever.
Exactly.
What are you going to have?
Especially now that we have like a new federal database to say, like you said before, yep, for a burglar to look and say, oh, this guy no longer has a gun. I'm going to break into his house. And if I have to kill him, I can do so. He has no way to defend himself.
And then it's like some of my friends, I'm not naming names, obviously, but some of my friends are just so starry-eyed. And they're like, oh, everything's great. Or we got a couple cans of beans, or we got storage stuff in our house and we got a couple like guns. We're okay. And it's like, there's some people like they're really just deliberately ignorant with this stuff. And it's like, you need to look this at with both eyes open. And you need to understand if this passes, what the implications are. I don't have my permit to purchase here, so that's something I'm taking care of tomorrow. And I'm borrowing money to go get a gun. I need something because as soon as I have, that's what's going to have to happen. I need to get a gun. Because what this does is that it basically says it doesn't matter if you're a red state or a blue state.
Yeah,
you have to obey or we will come after you.
And and I think I tried to say this before, Democrats, do you want to start a civil war?
Yes.
Because all of this is how you start a civil war.
Yep. And that's
I don't know. I forgot the exact number of how many gun owners there are in the United States. But if you think they're all going to peacefully just hand their guns in or pay like hundreds and hundreds of dollars just to get a license, to put it bluntly, you got another thing coming.
Yeah. It's horrific. It's fundamentally horrific. I want to.
It's like, oh, but we got the military because we're part of the federal government. Yeah. Be prepared to see about half the military at least commit desertion.
See, this is what I'm proud about my country with is that people have been buying guns for a long time because people know as soon as they ban it, that's it. So people have been stocked up. It's like you better be ready for this because, they're going to come after people fast because if they're concerned, if the Democrats are concerned about losing the House or losing one of the branches of government,
I guarantee you they're going to lose it if they try to pass this.
It's funny. Well, the media's not going to cover this. They haven't covered this hardly at all.
That's why we have to.
We do. I don't even think I've seen any other sources cover this material anywhere. So my point, Mike, real quick is they're trying to move fast and they're trying to tyrannize very, very quickly the American people. And we can tell the Republicans have no backbone. They have absolutely no backbone.
Which is why as soon as it's up, I'm joining the ranks of the Catholic Conservative Party of America.
Yeah. The chilling thing is the only thing that could defend this is the Supreme Court. And I think Biden
I didn't even think about that.
The Supreme Court's the only thing that could knock this down. Because Republicans,
and as it stands, it probably will.
But Republicans are enablers, right? Trump was really the he was the only one pushing back. He's the only one in the Republican Party fighting, aside with the exception of maybe Ted Cruz and a couple others. Nope, everyone just bent over and they said, okay, we'll just take it. You know, Trump really acted like he was the third party. He went from being supported by the Republicans to, oh, no, now he's breaking the rules. We have to get rid of him. So they all teamed up against him, right? It's this illusion that there's two parties when there's one, right? But my point is that if this goes through, which they have the votes for, I think, the only thing that's going to stop it is the Supreme Court, which,
as it stands right now, it is likely to strike this down if Joe Biden does sign it. However, if he does follow through on court packing, kiss your guns goodbye.
Yep, and then I'm predicting it now. They're going to demonize every conservative member of the Supreme Court to put public pressure on them as much as they can to bend. Just give up. Everything will be okay if you give up. And then they give up, and then everything gets worse. It's chilling.
They've already done that.
Yeah, it's which they have, but they're going to do it even more because it works. And this kind of ties in the point I was going to make earlier with, initially I was going to cover AOC being caught as a liar, which she is. And I was going to cover that in a lot more detail, but I saw Tim Pool covered it in a lot of detail. I'll send you the link, Mike, so we can post it in the show notes, and Crowder covered it too. But briefly, I wanted to say the reason why the party can openly lie and cheat in elections, which if you haven't read the Times article on how this, in their words, this shadowy cabal stole the election, it's their PR version of it. So it makes it sound like this vigilante, like Batman, came in, this group banded together and cheated just to save the country from Biff Tannen from taking over and plunging us into 10,000 years of darkness, is how it's written, right? But it's a Time article that got a lot of crap. And they can openly brag about this stuff, and they're so blatantly arrogant. They don't care if they lie. They know they're in power. They know they're the number. They know they're in power. Nothing short of God is going to stop them, and they don't believe in God. And there's no political counterbalance to them, right? There's no deterrence to them. The media will cover everything they say, like protect it. Like they'll put a smoke screen over it or just not cover it if it's too bad PR. And they have the strongest military in the world to back them up, right? There's literally no force aside from literally God coming down and striking them down that can stop them. There's no earthly power that can really effectively stop them as far as I'm aware. They know that. So they know they can openly lie and flip-flop on any position they want. And they know that when they need to put pressure on people and, in their words, break the will of the American people, break their will is what they said, was their words. It was taken from a video I can show. But break them. We must break the American people, right?
Right.
If
and it sort of made me think of a story. You mentioned no power short of God. It kind of reminded me of a story, regarding Saint Clair of Assisi, where she was faced with an invading army. I forgot whose army it was, but the odds were not in the Italians' favor. So she goes up to a high point in the monastery, and she's got the monstrance. Which, if you don't know what a monstrance, it's basically a vessel designed to display the Blessed Sacrament, the Holy Eucharist. She took it to a high point in the monastery. She held it aloft, and the whole army fled.
Wow, that's like biblical stuff. My whole point is that if there's no power that can stop these people, right, and they know it, they don't care if you catch them in lies. They don't care if you expose them at this point, right? The media has sufficient control on the masses, and they know social media will just lockstep. They just fall into position, right?
Right.
They know it worked. Why aren't they going to keep doing it? And so with people like AOC, it's morally reprehensible that she completely made up this whole story. It's completely morally reprehensible. The problem is that it seems like nobody cares, and there's no political repercussions on her. Maybe she won't get voted in, but there's enough. The state can effectively vote in who they want now. In general, they have the ability to, because they've tried it. They prepared for election fraud for years. They had 4 years to do it, and they specifically prepared for it. And they even bragged about it. Biden had a slip of the tongue. He bragged about it, right? It's not the election fraud that's the issue. Even though even more evidence is still coming out about it, where it's getting even more clear that they cheated, right? Which we should do a whole episode on, of all the new evidence coming out. My point is that we are in such a state of moral decay that we have no morality to even condemn this with, right? When you go from for the initial postmodernist perspective that there is no truth, you have no objective framework for anything, and morality is just as arbitrary as the direction of the wind. Just like everything else, be it race, not yet, but it will be, race, your gender, right? Your sexual orientation, your perspective on anything, right? And your position in society. It's completely all arbitrary, just like everything in society. So that's why people say gender roles are completely arbitrary, because society is the only thing that really seems to determine any of that stuff, and that's completely that, and that's the only real true closest thing we've got to objective framework. So once you have that once I want to finish this thought, is you have this established perspective, right? Where it literally makes no difference if you believe in God or not. It does, but the perspective is that it literally doesn't. Nothing matters, or everything matters at the same time. It's completely irrelevant. You have this completely nihilistic framework that not only the world largely believes, common society actively believes. Or maybe if you think differently, you're too scared to speak out against it because you'll be publicly ridiculed, mocked, and shamed for it everywhere. 6 ways to Sunday. It's not just that society's lost its framework of objectivity. The problem is that they have any objective frameworks to condemn this stuff in, right? If morality is arbitrary, if there's no God, and say the state steps in and says, well, I'm God, and I can redefine anything that I want, I can lie, and if I say I told the truth, then I told the truth. And that's the problem.
And yet we conservatives are the one who used 1984 as an instruction manual.
Right. That's exactly the point, right? If there's no objective framework for anything, you can redefine it any way you want. And if you've got all the guns, which is what the state has, or you've got the might makes right, if you've got all the might, you decide exactly how morals work. And that's the problem.
And then there's another implication, that you're dragged before a court, and it's just a verdict decided by popular opinion.
Yes.
So if somebody makes an accusation and the majority of people think you're guilty, you're guilty.
Right. It's the mob gets to decide, and then the state gets to decide. And just let's say the jury is every single one of those people in the jury doesn't like you. Well, who cares what the law says? Because the law is an outmoded frame of reference, right? Who says the law has to be the law? Well, the state. Okay. So the state gets to arbitrarily decide things, right? The law comes from a framework. The Constitution comes from a framework that there is a divine point of reference. I'm not saying which God. I'm not saying that there has to be a particular God. And I mean, I'm biased, of course, mind you, but just from a purely argumentative perspective, if you have an absence of any point of reference, there is an absence of moral decision-making, right? I'm not making an argument that of which God is there, right? But you have to have that point of reference in your philosophy, right? Otherwise, everything can be redefined at the state's whim.
Exactly. And we are starting to run out of times. So, again, the king of the transition here.
Yeah.
Mr. Benks, your book quote, please.
G.K. Chesterton. Whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place.
Ooh, very fitting. Good stuff, good stuff. Because when it comes to a majority of when the left wing makes legislation, they never, in my observation, they never see past the first step. Because, yeah, you got a law which has all these different fines, all these different fees. They think, okay, so criminals don't have a way to purchase guns, problem solved. No, because the black market's still a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the only one people it really affects are law-abiding citizens. And it'll be just like Great Britain. Yeah, gun violence may go down. Violent crime is going to skyrocket.
Let me say this last point. If everything is arbitrary, which it isn't, but if that's the perspective, right, everything's arbitrary. And like I said earlier, if the state's the one that gets to decide what's moral, right? If people believe that, they can't condemn the state for doing anything. And I think that's the reason why people roll over right now. They bought into this moral nihilism. And you have to have morals and a point of reference in order to condemn this stuff. Because if you don't have morals, how can you condemn, for example, places like communist China that can arbitrarily decide, because you're a prisoner, that the state can't just come in and take your organs out because the state has decided you don't need them, especially hearts. Well, you're going to die anyways, or we just don't like you. You're a Uyghur Muslim. Take out your heart and sell it. And if you have no morals, you cannot condemn that. If you have no point of reference, you cannot condemn that.
True.
You need a point of reference, whatever it is. You need some kind of point of reference to objectively condemn it that isn't defined by human opinion or majority votes.
That is true. And on that dark note, we are out of time. So we'd like to thank each and every one of you for watching. Every count on the view counter is someone saying, you know what, these guys are worth my time. I'm going to go ahead and give them a part of my time. Speaking of which, somebody liked the Facebook page today who is somebody I don't know.
Yay!
So, sir, you know who you are. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Tangent Kings. We really do appreciate it. And without further ado, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you all around the same time next week. So goodbye. God love you. Pax et bonum!
Howdy, folks. If you like what you saw, be sure to follow us on Facebook. And now, on Rumble. And coming soon to MeWe. God bless.